Junior Data Analyst. Brad said it like he was doing me a favor, like he was offering me a promotion instead of flushing 11 years of my career down a toilet made of venture capital and incompetence. He actually smiled when he said it, that practiced MBA smile that probably came with his Stanford diploma, leaning against his standing desk like a tech bro Moses delivering commandments from the mountain of disruption. Entry-level compensation, of course. $58,000 to start. It's a really exciting opportunity to get back to hands-on work without all that management overhead. I sat there in his office with its motivational posters and its whiteboard covered in frameworks he'd copied from consulting decks, doing math in my head. $58,000. Down from $127,000. A 47% pay cut for the privilege of being called junior, after building every single system this company ran on. He kept talking about strategic realignment and organizational efficiency, but all I heard was the sound of my own value being assessed at minimum wage by someone who'd asked me last week if we could make the data more positive for a client presentation. I'm Claire Novak, and that conversation happened on April 23 at 2:15 p.m. in an office I should have walked out of immediately but didn't because I was still operating under the delusion that competence and loyalty eventually get rewarded instead of exploited. I'd been director of data analytics at Stratton Analytics Corporation for 11 years, 7 months, and 23 days. Not that anyone was counting except me and the systems I'd built that were apparently worth less than a recent graduate who didn't know SQL from SQLite. I drove a 7-year-old Toyota Camry with 162,000 miles on it and a check engine light I'd named Harold because we'd been together so long it felt rude not to. I lived in a modest house with a mortgage and a garden full of tomatoes that never quite ripened, the botanical equivalent of my career trajectory under new management. The trouble started when Douglas Chen showed up 4 months earlier with venture capital money and the kind of dangerous confidence that comes from reading books about leadership written by people who've never actually led anything that mattered. Doug was a finance guy playing tech executive, complete with the minimalist wardrobe and the artisanal coffee preferences and the ability to say, synergistic value creation, without laughing at himself. His first move was hiring Brad Hutchinson, his Stanford buddy with an impressive resume and absolutely zero ability to actually do the job he'd been hired for. Brad became VP of Data Operations, a position that hadn't existed until they needed somewhere to put him that was above me in the org chart. Brad couldn't write a database query if you held a gun to his head. He thought data visualization meant making charts prettier. He once asked if we could adjust the algorithms to produce more optimistic outcomes, because a client didn't like what the actual analysis showed. But Brad had the right degree from the right school and spoke Doug's language of strategic frameworks and operational excellence, so Brad got the VP title and the authority to restructure my department, which mostly meant destroying it. The demotion offer came wrapped in corporate speak about organizational evolution and returning to individual contributor roles, but what it actually meant was, we're replacing you with someone cheaper and less competent who won't question our decisions, and we're betting you'll either accept this humiliation or quit quietly without making trouble. Take some time to think about it, Brad said, still smiling, still leaning against his desk like this was a casual conversation instead of an execution. We really value your institutional knowledge and want to find a way to keep you on the team. I left his office, walked to my car, sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, and started calculating. Not whether to accept their insulting offer, but how much damage they were about to cause themselves by underestimating exactly what I'd built and who actually owned it. Here's what Brad and Doug didn't know because they'd never bothered to learn. Every critical system at Stratton ran on infrastructure I'd built from scratch. Custom databases, automated reporting platforms, data integration tools that connected 300 clients to our analysis systems. I hadn't just worked on these systems, I designed them, coded them, and maintained them personally because Stratton never allocated resources to proper development. I'd solved problems at 10 p.m. on weeknights and 2 a.m. on weekends using my personal equipment because I cared about delivering quality work even when the company didn't care enough to provide adequate tools. Which meant, legally, I owned most of the intellectual property. Every significant piece of code lived in my personal GitHub repositories with clear licensing that gave Stratton rights to use it while employed, but didn't transfer ownership. I'd been careful about this, not because I'd planned for this moment, but because I'd learned early in my career that protecting your work protects your options. Now, before this gets even more satisfying, I need you to do something. About 87% of you are listening to this like it's a podcast you don't have to pay for, scrolling through other content, not subscribed. That's like going to someone's concert, enjoying the show, and then sneaking out before the encore without even clapping. Hit subscribe right now. Not later, not maybe, right now. Because what happens next when they realize what they actually lost is the kind of justice that restores your faith in consequences. That night, I made my decision. I wasn't accepting the demotion. I wasn't quitting quietly. I was going to build something they couldn't function without and make them pay premium rates to access it. April 24th, I submitted my resignation effective May 8th. 2 weeks notice, professional, brief. Pursuing other opportunities. Doug tried scheduling an exit interview. I declined. Brad asked me to document all systems before leaving. I replied with one sentence: all documentation is in the shared drive folders I've maintained for 11 years. What I didn't mention was that the documentation explained what the systems did, not how they worked. Anyone could read it and understand the functionality, but they'd have no idea how to maintain, modify, or troubleshoot the actual infrastructure. During my final 2 weeks at Stratton, I worked on something else during evenings. A standalone analytics platform that could replace everything I'd built for them. Better code, cleaner interface, more flexible architecture. I registered with Claridata Analytics LLC on April 29th, built a basic website with pricing designed specifically for Stratton's client base, and prepared to launch the day after my employment ended. My last day was May 8th. I packed my awards back when the company pretended to value innovation, deleted my personal files, and walked out at 5 p.m. May 9th, the first client called Stratton support line. Their weekly automated report hadn't generated. Simple problem, except the script ran on a server maintained by my personal account, which had been deactivated. Brad's new analytics team spent 6 hours trying to figure out why before realizing the infrastructure was more complicated than their understanding. May 10th, 3 more clients reported issues. May 15th, 17 clients were experiencing service disruptions. Brad's team worked 18-hour days trying to patch systems they'd never actually learned, using documentation that explained outputs but not architecture. May 16th, my phone rang. Douglas Chin, personally. Claire, we're experiencing technical difficulties with some infrastructure components. We'd appreciate your assistance resolving these issues. Obviously, we'd compensate you for consulting time. I don't work for Stratton anymore, I said, pleasant and professional. Your current team should be able to help. They're having trouble with certain legacy systems. Your consulting rate would be acceptable for a few hours of emergency support. My rate is $300 per hour, 4-hour minimum. Would you like to schedule something? Silence. Long enough I thought he'd hung up. Then, that's quite expensive for basic troubleshooting. That's my rate for emergency consulting on critical infrastructure. You demoted me to $58,000 to maintain systems worth millions in client revenue. $300 per hour is extremely reasonable. He didn't call back that day. But Brad called May 17th, voice tight with panic. Claire, clients are threatening to leave. We can't figure out what's failing. Just give us a few hours to help transition properly. I gave you 2 weeks' notice and maintained all systems during my employment. My obligation ended May 8th. If you need consulting, I'm available at $300 per hour. This infrastructure was built during your employment. You have an obligation to ensure proper transition. I documented everything per standard practices. If your team can't maintain systems, that's a staffing issue. My consulting rate is $300 per hour. By May 22nd, 32 clients had reported problems. 5 were terminating contracts due to service quality. Stratton was hemorrhaging revenue while Brad's team drowned in technical debt they'd inherited without preparation. May 23rd, Doug called again. Different tone this time. Let's be realistic. These systems are critical and you're the only person who completely understands them. We need a solution. I agree. That's why I started Claridata Analytics. Same services Stratton offers, better infrastructure, more reliable support. Some of your clients might benefit from a provider who actually understands the technology. Long pause. Blood pressure audibly rises through the phone. You're competing with us? I'm offering analytic services. Some companies may currently be Stratton clients who are dissatisfied with recent service quality. That's a conflict of interest. You can't solicit our clients. My employment contract has a 6-month non-compete for direct solicitation. I'm not soliciting. I'm running a business. If clients contact me because they're unhappy with Stratton's service, that's their decision. This is sabotage. This is capitalism. You offered me intern wages to maintain systems worth millions. I declined and started my own company. If your infrastructure is failing, that's a management problem. He hung up. 20 minutes later, a cease and desist letter from Stratton's lawyers demanding I stop operating Claridata. My lawyer Patricia Morrison responded beautifully. Ms. Novak owns the intellectual property, terminated employment lawfully, and operates a legitimate business within contractual bounds. Stratton's technical issues stem from inadequate knowledge transfer and insufficient staff expertise. Not Ms. Novak's legal responsibility. June 1st, 8 clients had terminated Stratton contracts. 5 contacted me directly. Could Claridata provide comparable services? Yes. I could and did, at rates 20% lower than Stratton because my overhead was minimal and I didn't have MBA layers extracting value. June 8th, Doug called again. Completely different tone. Claire, I think we started off wrong here. I'd like to discuss a consulting arrangement. I'm listening. We need someone maintaining existing infrastructure while we transition to new systems. You understand these completely. We'll contract Claridata for technical support at your rates. Emergency consulting is $300 per hour. Ongoing infrastructure support is $12,000 monthly retainer for up to 20 hours, additional hours at $350. You have 5 days to decide before I'm fully booked. June 12th, they agreed. 6-month contract, $12,000 monthly, payment on the first of each month, termination clause if they failed to pay or restricted my other clients. For 6 months, I consulted for Stratton while building Claridata. Maintained their critical systems, trained their team, documented everything they needed to eventually operate independently. Also served 12 clients who'd left Stratton, plus 7 new clients who'd never worked with them. December, 6 months post-demotion, Claridata's revenue exceeded my director's salary. I was billing Stratton $12,000 monthly for part-time consulting while serving other clients at comparable rates. Total revenue, roughly $180,000 annually, working from home with zero commute and complete schedule control. December 15th, my Stratton contract ended. They asked to renew. I declined. Too busy with actual Claridata clients. December 18th, Doug called. Claire, I want to apologize for how we handled your transition. In hindsight, we made significant mistakes valuing your contributions. I appreciate that. Also wanted to mention Brad left in October. Pursuing other opportunities. Translation, fired after causing a technical disaster that cost millions in lost revenue. And if you'd ever consider returning in a leadership role, we'd be interested in discussing terms. I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy running Claridata. We're hiring our first employee next month and looking at office space. 6 months after they tried demoting me to intern, I was running a growing business that competed directly with them and served clients they'd lost. 1 year later, 23 clients, 3 employees, $400,000 revenue annually. Moved into office space, invested in infrastructure, built a reputation Stratton couldn't match. 2 years later, ran into Brad at an industry conference. He was strategic consulting for a mid-sized firm, unable to find another VP position after his Stratton disaster became industry knowledge. Claire, heard Claridata's doing well. Very well. 8 employees now, expanding into predictive analytics. How are things? Good. Consulting keeps me busy. We both knew he was struggling. Last month, 3 years post-demotion, email from Doug. Stratton was acquired by a larger firm, partly because they'd never recovered from client losses and reputation damage. Doug stepped down as CEO. I wanted to thank you for your professionalism during a difficult situation. You handled everything with class. I learned a valuable lesson about valuing technical expertise. I wish I'd learned it earlier. I appreciated the acknowledgement, even 3 years later. The lesson isn't about revenge, though satisfaction in building success from their contempt definitely existed. Real lesson: your expertise has value independent of someone else's validation or job title. They thought stripping me to intern level would cut costs and eliminate someone who knew too much. What they actually did was force me to recognize my value independent of their recognition. Pushed me to build something I owned completely that didn't depend on their approval or politics. That demotion letter was the best thing that happened to my career. Freed me from believing I needed them. Showed me the systems I'd built had value beyond the organization that underpaid me. Taught me that being essential to someone else's success means nothing if they don't recognize it, but being essential to your own success means everything. Doug thought he was cutting costs. Brad thought he was consolidating power. What they actually did was create their biggest competitor from their most valuable employee. Thanks for sticking through this story. Everyone who understands expertise doesn't disappear because someone gives you a worse title and smaller paycheck. If this resonated, if you've been demoted or undervalued or told you weren't worth what you knew you were worth, subscribe and share your story in the comments. These workplace justice tales remind us we're not defined by others' assessments. Your skills are portable, your expertise belongs to you, and you don't need permission from people who don't appreciate you to build something proving your worth. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to recognize it. Sometimes the best response to being undervalued isn't fighting for recognition, it's building something that makes recognition irrelevant.